10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 330. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 330 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. So happy to have you in and ready to bring you a new series this month. This month we're going to talk about the music of Clifford Brown, which seems like a great place to go after we talked about Charlie Parker. Now I'll be talking about a trumpet player and another person who really revolutionized the bebop language. So that is what we are going to be focusing our efforts on this month. But before we jump into the show, just wanted to remind everybody, if you're new here, this is a listener-supported show, which means we keep the podcast coming out week after week in high quality with PDFs and all that stuff due to your tremendous support in the form of a small monthly donation. We do use the Patreon platform for those donations and the delivery of all your materials that go along with this podcast. And you can find that and sign up by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners. You'll get an idea of all the different benefits that you get, and you can help support the show and keep it coming at you week after week. Shout out to some new patrons. Thank you to our new $5 patrons, Carol, John, Martin, Emma, CMA, and Ricardo. And thank you to our new $3 patrons, Enrico, Christoph, Jorg, Joel, Tim, and Diane. Thank you so much for becoming part of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. And of course, to everybody over there that's been supporting us for months and years, thank you. We could not do this without you. So remember, you do get a PDF and audio examples with every single episode when you become a supporter. And you can find that at 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up for instant access today. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So I'm sure that most of you out there know the music of Clifford Brown and know a little bit about him, but I think it's really important that we talk a little bit about his life and the time period with which he was playing in. Unfortunately, Clifford Brown died when he was 25 years old, which is eerily similar to the life of Charlie Parker. Charlie Parker lived a little bit longer than Clifford Brown, but they both died tragically young. And Clifford Brown was another massive bebop innovator and helped bring this brand new music to the masses. Now, while Clifford and Bird both died very, very early, I feel it's important to point out the difference between sort of the end of their lives. And Charlie Parker was famously a substance abuser. That was a big part of his life, and it was the main reason that he passed away so young. Clifford Brown was famously all about clean living. He did not drink, he did not smoke, he did not do drugs, and unfortunately, he tragically died at the age of 25 in a car crash, and that was why his life was cut so short. Really just a tragic ending to one of the brightest lights in the music world. And, often we think about what we would have heard from these musicians if they had lived longer. And I think that Clifford is one of the most tragic stories. Now, I know whether they abuse substances or not, it really has no bearing on the music. I just wanted to point out that part of Clifford's story. Now, unfortunately, I don't know of any recordings that contain Charlie Parker and Clifford Brown on them. And if I'm wrong about that, please send me a message because I haven't come across any. And that in itself is a tragedy right there. But I do think it's important to realize that Clifford Brown did actually interact with Charlie Parker and actually sat in with him for a week at Club Harlem in Philadelphia in 1952. And Clifford Brown was actually quoted as saying, "Bird helped my morale a great deal. One night he took me into a corner and said, 'I don't believe it. I hear what you're saying, but I don't believe it.'" So you can imagine the kind of impact that the creator of bebop actually had on Clifford Brown, and how amazing that must have been for Clifford to actually play with Bird. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is talking a little bit about the differences between Bird and Clifford Brown, and some of the things that Clifford Brown really contributed to the language of jazz and the language of bebop. So, of course, let's dive into a really concrete example this week. So we are going to be talking about the fact that Clifford Brown was not afraid to use very, very horizontal playing. Now, this is something that we've talked about in one of the Charlie Parker episodes, where we said Charlie Parker really likes to, when he's using horizontal language, sort of mix that in with a lot of vertical language. So if he's playing a longer horizontal line, he'll immediately jump into some arpeggios and some more vertical playing. And the difference between Bird and Clifford was that Clifford was not afraid to play these really, really long scale-based lines without ever really interrupting them with arpeggios. He figured out a way to make these lines really, really interesting while staying fairly horizontal on his instrument. And what we've got today is we've got 3 examples of that type of playing that we're going to listen to and tear apart a little bit. So let's check out example number 1 on your PDF for this week, and then we'll chat about it after. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. So what we hear is a lot of the same types of devices that Charlie Parker was known for using, but we see them used in a slightly different way. So what I want to look at is I want to look at the interval structure. So if you look through this line, what you're going to notice is that there is largely the intervals of whole steps and half steps. And then we see him sneak a few thirds in there for a slight texture change, but we don't see any intervals wider than a fourth. And the fourth comes at the very, very end of the line. It is the last interval that is played. Before that point, we only see half steps, whole steps, and thirds. So when I say horizontal, that's what I mean. And when we think about the thirds, they happen sporadically, periodically. There's not a bunch of stacks of thirds, which would indicate to us that we're outlining a more vertical structure, a chord, right? Or arpeggiating a chord. You'll notice that the thirds are interspersed kind of far away from each other. And what we mostly see is scale segments. And when I say scale segments, what I mean specifically is intervals of half steps and whole steps strung together. So if you look at the line, you will notice that most of it is scale-based. It's very, very horizontal. It's just kind of the term that I use for it because that's how it looks on paper. So your job is to go through this line and the rest of these lines and actually figure out kind of what he's doing harmonically. And then in the other episodes in this series, we're going to go a little bit more in depth into what he's doing. This is kind of a little bit of an overview of what he's doing that's a little bit different than what we've seen before. And then we're going to dive in and get into the nitty gritty and talk about really what's going on harmonically. So here's the second example. This one is much, much longer, but I want you to notice that it has a lot of the same characteristics as the line that I just played. Here's example number 2. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. So much longer, and there's going to be some vertical playing in here because we are looking at a line that is so long. But let's dive into it a little bit. So if we look at the first, second, and half of the third measure, we're again going to see that mostly based off of half steps and whole steps. Very, very horizontal playing, very scale-based playing. And then in the second half of the third measure, we do see him outlining an arpeggio for a little bit of relief. But then at the beginning of the fourth measure, we see him dive back into this horizontal playing. Then for measures 4, 5, and most of measure 6 of the line, again, we see mostly intervals of half steps, whole steps, and a few thirds happening here. Then at the end of the sixth measure, the last 3 notes of the sixth measure, we do see another one of those arpeggiated phrases. But then immediately for the last 2 measures, he dives back into that half step and whole step based playing. So I wanted to outline this one because it is really, really clear that he is able to do these extended scale-based lines. And again, what you can do is you can dive into the harmonic language a little bit more and try to figure out, okay, how is he making these horizontal lines interesting? Why, without the texture change, like Charlie Parker would have done, how does it stay interesting? And that's the big question I want you to ask. And, take some notes on that. Actually write down why you think it stays interesting. And that could be a great angle for you to approach your own playing and your own line writing. All right, I've got one more line for you this week, and this one really exemplifies what we were talking about. This one is all horizontal based with no vertical language whatsoever. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so what do we see here? This one is really, really just using the scale, using half steps and whole steps. There isn't actually an interval outside of that half step or whole step example that I gave. It is really the epitome of horizontal / scale-based playing. We can see that he goes right up the scale at the beginning, comes to a crest halfway through the second measure, turns around, starts coming down. He actually uses a repeated note in the second measure, and then it is literally all half steps and whole steps from there on out. Pretty cool. He does interject with a triplet, as we have heard in the second line as well. So think about why he's using that. And again, what I really want you to do is dig into the harmonic content. See if you can start picking out some things that you recognize in terms of enclosures, chromatic approaches, where he's using the chord tones, stuff like that. And that'll really give you a great place to jump off from when we start digging into his harmonic language a little bit more. Some of the things that he's doing that are a little bit different than Charlie Parker, but do have a through line from Charlie Parker's playing because it is, part of the bebop language. So study these lines, play them, start to get your ears wrapped around them. Do some listening to Clifford Brown this week, and that's really going to start to get this artist's sound in your ears as we dive into more and more of his playing. Let me know if you have any questions. Remember, you can get a PDF of all these lines to study them more deeply by signing up for our Patreon. Go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up, and you get instant access to this PDF and every single other one that we've ever put out. Hope you're going to enjoy this. Clifford Brown is one of my favorite players. Let me know what you think, and again, do not hesitate to ask any questions. I will talk to you all next week with another brand new episode. Hope you're all doing well, staying safe and healthy, and have a great weekend. Bye, everybody.